During our visit to the Jamestown settlement and through our research, we investigated the relationship between the Powhatan Indians and the English colonists.
Alright, this is the setup of a Powhatan village during the colonial settlement of the English in Jamestown.
This is the outside of the Powhatan Indians' wigwam. As you can see, it is made out of natural resources, unlike the Englishmen used when they built their own huts.
The Indians also used all sorts of natural resources like animal skins, woods, and plants for their health, for protection. They used it for clothing and for food as well. They know how to use all the resources of the land, unlike the colonists who had no idea what they could or couldn't use or what was poisonous or not poisonous.
This is an example of the Powhatan Indian canoe that they used to navigate the swampy areas of Virginia. They used trees as a natural resource to make these canoes.
This is also much smaller than what the Powhatan had access to.
This is Chief Powhatan. He was chief of the Powhatan Indians, and he was also Pocahontas' father. Chief Powhatan was known to always have a sour look or a sad face. He was constantly on guard for the Powhatan Indians, protecting against enemies. He wasn't ever known to really be friendly with the English colonists, and he didn't support the settlement that they had later in Jamestown. Many times he actually tried to get rid of this settlement, but later we see that he respected the wishes of his daughter by respecting the English colonists and their settlement. Okay, in a book written by Helen Roundtree, she actually talks about how John Smith met Powhatan, and this is how he described him. He is a personage of tall, well-proportioned man with a sour look, his head somewhat gray, his beard so thin that it seems that it's not there at all. His age was near 60, a very able and hardly body to endure any labor.
In 1607, 104 men landed in Jamestown, totally unaware of what they would find there, thinking that they would find gold or wealth, or even Spaniards that they would come in conflict with, and they had no idea that the Indians would be their main conflict. They took 4 months to travel from England to Jamestown, and these are an example of some of the boat's structures and size. They took 1 month to unload, and as you can see, they look very different from those of the Powhatan Indians. So that would have been a big difference in the Indians' point of view of the English.
So before the English had even begun to think about exploring the New World, the Powhatan Indians had lived in Virginia for around 12,000 years and had called it home. And so they were a lot more suited to the environment, and they had really understood and learned to use the resources that Virginia had provided. John Smith's account roughly estimates how many fighting men there were in various parts of Powhatan region, and he estimates that there's almost 25,000 people for the later part of the Woodland period, which was before and during the English settlement time. And the people there had mastered the waterways and the land and knew how to grow crops and knew which crops were good and not, and they knew how to drink fresh water, which all became a struggle for the English Europeans that the Powhatans used to their advantage later on when they were in conflict with the Englishmen.
This is an outline of what the fort would have looked like before it expanded into a 5-sided fort. After the expansion, this church was built, and it still stands today.
This is an example of what the fence would have looked like around the Jamestown fort when the English colonists settled in Jamestown. This fence actually has holes in it, and this represents what the English colonists would have used to provide ways for them to defend themselves against the Powhatan Indians. Pocahontas was born in the year of 1595. The colonists knew of her as a kid because she would come to the fort and she would play around, and she was actually known to do cartwheels around the fort. She was known as an upbeat and happy kid. At the age of 12, she met John Smith and they had a friendly relationship.
Here we have a statue of Pocahontas. Pocahontas played a major role in the relationship between the natives and the English colonists through her marriage with John Rolfe. This is an original picture of Pocahontas' second marriage to John Rolfe. Pocahontas' first marriage was by choice to a Powhatan man. We are unsure of the history or the whereabouts of what happened to this man. Recently found is the church where she married and walked down this aisle to marry John Rolfe. Later we will discuss the marriage and significance of the marriage between Pocahontas and John Rolfe.
In a book written by Camilla Townsend, she talks about the account where Pocahontas was actually abducted by the English colonists. Now, she was abducted by the English colonists because of her father, Chief Powhatan, not listening to what the English colonists wanted him to do, so they actually ended up going and capturing Pocahontas in order for a ransom. But this ransom and this abduction led to a relationship between her and the English colonists, and she ended up liking them. They ended up liking her. She actually, in the year 1614, she married John Rolfe, and this marriage between John Rolfe and Pocahontas actually led to a good relationship between the Powhatan Indians and the English colonists. And now here is an account from an expert on the relationship and the marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe and the effects that it had on the Powhatan Indians and the English.
Not a Christian, right? The English are going to take care of that. In March of 1614, Pocahontas will be converted to the Anglican faith. They give her a brand new name. They call her Rebecca, which means mother of two people. And then John Rolfe is going to ask the permission of both the leadership of the fort and Chief Powhatan to marry Pocahontas. What's interesting about this, other Englishmen asked Powhatan's permission to marry some of his other daughters. He turns them all down, but he says yes to Rolfe. What might this marriage be an opportunity for both sides? What might it lead to, right? What's been going on that both sides are probably very tired of at this point? The war, right? It might bring an alliance. Think about any royal wedding back in Europe back at that time. April 5th of 1614 in the first church of Jamestown, right where we were, right where that altar is located, is where this very iconic marriage took place between John Rolfe and Pocahontas. Of course, this is a more romantic memory of that wedding, right? Probably didn't exactly look like this, but it's in that church that wedding took place. Unfortunately, perhaps the most intriguing character in this whole story, Pocahontas.
From the year 1614 to 1617, there was finally peace between the Powhatan Indians and the English colonists, thanks to Pocahontas and her marriage to John Rolfe. However, on her way back from England, she was headed back to Jamestown when she passed away in 1617. Through her death, conflict started to arise between the Powhatans and the Englishmen again. This happened because the Englishmen were looking for land to grow tobacco, so they started to take over the land and the wealth, and kind of outgrew the Powhatan Indians. The Powhatan Indians lost power and the conflict started to get bigger. Here's an example of what the early fields of tobacco would look like. Now here's an account from an expert talking about the tobacco trade of the English colonists.
John Rolfe, who had been on the sea venture, he had been in Bermuda during the starving time, is introducing a new type of tobacco to the colony. Important to remember that the Powhatan Indians had been growing tobacco for many, many years, but the English didn't like their variety. It was too bitter. So when Rolfe arrives here in Virginia, he's carrying a hybrid form of the plant mixed with the West Indian variety. Tobacco is ultimately going to become the saving grace, economically speaking, of the colony, because they don't find the gold and the silver they were hoping for. But tobacco is eventually going to make Virginia the wealthiest of the British colonies in North America. Tobacco's influence on the culture and the economy of Virginia cannot be overstated. It is still one of the largest exports out of Virginia. But this is going to...
There were many ups and downs between the English colonists and the Powhatan Indians.
As you can see, the relationship between the Powhatan Indians and the English colonists first started off as a bit rocky, as they seemed to be enemies. Then after the marriage of John Rolfe and Pocahontas, this relationship mended and they had more of a relationship. And then you can see that after the death of Pocahontas, they began to be enemies again.
I hope you learned from this video that Pocahontas was more than just a Disney movie.